Cathy.
Cathy Newman, Channel 4 News. You talk about tax cuts you can believe in, but what about tax rises you can believe in? You seem to be all over the place on VAT. Some of your front benchers rule out raising it, some of you don't. Can you tell me where you are this morning on VAT? And also, you stood there on the platform together, but we're hearing reports that you're kind of winding each other up on the campaign trail. Have you yet shared an ice cream together?
Of the many surreal questions, that's the most surreal. We're happy to share ice creams. Vince and I have always worked and will continue to work as an extremely good and effective team together. On VAT, our position is very clear. Our plans do not require an increase in VAT, precisely because we have costed both our tax switch, as we've talked about this morning, and as we will unveil in greater detail when we publish our manifesto. We have a fully costed approach to a first major step towards dealing with a structural deficit, listing in detail £15 billion worth of cuts and savings. The position that Vince and I have both taken on VAT is that we see absolutely no reason to raise VAT because we have done our homework and we've identified where money can be generated and where money can be saved. The point we're making about the Conservatives is they have now, I've lost count now, they have said that they're going to freeze council tax, they're going to give a socking great big tax break to millionaires under inheritance tax, they're going to give national insurance tax breaks to small businesses, they're going to stop the national insurance increase, they're going to give a marriage tax break to some married couples and not others. All of that amounts to billions and billions of pounds of tax bribes, the vast majority of which have not been costed at all. They know the only way that they're going to be able to honour those tax bribes is by putting VAT up. That's the difference between ourselves and the Conservatives. I don't know whether you want to add anything.
Well, we have one tax increase that we're proposing in order to reduce the deficit, which is the £2 billion levy on bank profits in order to pay for the insurance that they receive from the taxpayer as long as banks continue to be underwritten in the way that they are. There is no need for an increase in value-added tax.
Yeah. Mike.
Good morning, Mike Sargent, BBC News. The environment doesn't seem to be playing a big role in the campaign so far. In 2006, Vince Cable unveiled a package of green taxes, £7 to £8 billion worth of green taxes. The commitment then from the Liberal Democrats to raise the share of environmental taxes to 3.6% of GDP. Is that a commitment you can repeat today?
Vince, do you want to take that?
There is a green tax switch in this package which relates to aviation, and we focus on aviation because for historical reasons it hasn't been effectively taxed. Pollution isn't taxed in the aviation industry because of international restrictions on taxation on fuel and because landing rights are handed out free of charge. So we think it should be charged, and we've come forward with this very concrete proposal for taxing planes rather than tickets, and of course at a higher rate than at present. And the mechanism proposed, which is on the emissions of engines, which is quantifiable, it's already information available, and on the distance of flights, which is information already available, is a practical way of doing it. The other element in the original green tax switch was on motor vehicles, much higher rates of vehicle excise duty for high-polluting vehicles and petrol duty. Well, those things have already happened, and the government's already introduced those within the last 2 or 3 years. We see no reason to add to it, particularly when petrol prices are higher than they've ever been.
Sean?
Thank you very much. Sean Dilley from UTV's Talk Sport Radio. Question to each of you, sirs, if that's okay. Mr. Cable, will you go as far as to condemn all tax havens and give a commitment to cut down on all of them? Mr. Clegg, apologies for being a bit boring here, but I want to push one more time, or as many times as necessary, on this strongest mandate idea. It is important that the public know whether you would back the party in a minority government with more seats than any other, or as a percentage, because people need to know at the end of the day, if they vote Lib Dem, are they really voting Labour?
Well, the issue about tax havens is, I mean, there are two quite separate issues which are often confused. I mean, one of which is that so-called tax havens are places with relatively low tax, you know, the Guernseys of this world. The other is that some tax havens tolerate illegality because they operate under a shroud of secrecy. And that, of course, must be condemned. More and more of the tax havens are being brought within the disciplines of the so-called OECD whitelist, and that's the mechanism we have to pursue in order to make sure there is openness and transparency.
On the strongest mandate, a vote for the Liberal Democrats is not a vote for any other party. A vote for the Liberal Democrats is a vote for the values and the principles and policies that Vince and I are talking about this morning to you. I don't think it is. I'm not seeking to come up with some mathematical formula. I'm seeking to establish a simple democratic principle, which is this: that it's not for any of the party leaders or any of the politicians to second guess the preferences of 45 million British voters. They're in charge. We're not. They're the kingmakers. We're not. And if people decide that no party, neither the Liberal Democrats nor Labour nor the Conservatives, deserve an outright majority in Parliament, then all I'm saying, and I'm being much more upfront about this, you should ask Gordon Brown and David Cameron, much more upfront about this, then I accept now, I shall tie my hands behind my back, that I think in a democracy, the party which has demonstrably got the biggest mandate, and invariably it's pretty obvious which party does, even if there isn't an outright majority, has the moral right first to seek to govern either on its own or reach out to other parties. I think it's just, I think that's called democracy.
Well, how is it obvious? I'm so sorry to press this. How is it obvious? Because, if it's obvious, it's either the party with more seats than any other, or it's the party with more of a percentage of the vote than any other. Clearly, you can tell voters and be upfront with them.
Sean, I concede that there is theoretically the possible that you could have this sort of photo finish and we could all split hairs. I think that every time that's been predicted in the past, it hasn't happened. Generally speaking, in an election, we all battle out our competing ideas and visions during the election campaign, and generally it is obvious which party enjoys a stronger mandate than any other does. If you have this surreal photo finish where two parties or three parties finish exactly at the same point, across the finishing line, well, then we'll have to deal with that strange anomaly. But I think let's just assume. Well, I'm saying that we're not trying to repeat history. We're not trying to draw lessons from history. What we're trying to establish is a principle that there are no deals between the politicians ahead of having people have their say. Yep.
William Green, Newcastle Journal. Just talk about the public social issue again. Do you think there is a risk that big public sector cuts does raise the risk of social unrest, particularly in places like the North East where you've just been? And secondly, does it annoy you when people say that this is almost more of a Vince Cable show? I mean, some of your opposition rivals in the North East have given me stuff which says purely Vince Cable, Vince Cable. And Mr Cable's election manifesto also has no mention of Nick Clegg and no photos at all.
It does. It does. Actually.
I always think when people ask me, I mean, Vince, I'm immensely proud, not only as a friend of Vince, but as a colleague of Vince, that Vince has emerged as the most trusted spokesperson on the biggest issue of the day. It's a bit like asking, I don't know, a captain of a cricket team whether they mind that they've got the best batsman on their team. I think it's great. I think it's absolutely, I think it's a sign of the times that it's the Liberal Democrats who have the team and have in Vince the most authoritative spokesperson on an issue which is dominating this election agenda. And I'm nothing other than proud and delighted that that is the case. Other than that, what's the question? Oh, no, yes, sorry. I think there is an issue for regions, and I was saying to Andrew earlier, I come from a region which is very dependent on public sector jobs. You could argue over-dependent. And I think there is a big issue for sort of sub-regional economies like South Yorkshire, like the North East, where I was yesterday or the day before yesterday, that the only way that those parts of the country and parts of the economy are going to be sustainable is if they diversify, if you have more private sector growth in jobs and so on. But the point I'm making is that it seems to me any politicians in charge are going to have to tread with some care if they first haven't come clean with people about the enormity of the decisions ahead, if they're then going to start trying to swing the axe with no legitimate mandate to do so. It seems to me I'm stating the obvious, that is a recipe for public reactions which will be feel both rather betrayed that politicians haven't been open with them in the first place, and secondly, they then feel that their own livelihoods and that of their families are being threatened by governments which, in their view, do not have a mandate to govern in the first place.